In this video, we're going to learn how to use sliders and switches for our Apple Watch projects. So let's create a new project. It will be a single view application and let's call it slider switch application. Hit next. Create. So let's include the Apple Watch target into a project. Now we will go to our interface storyboard. Now in the interface storyboard, let's put in a slider and a switch. Let's also put a label. Now we will open the Assistant Editor view. Now we will create instances of the slider, switch, and the label inside our interface controller.h file. So just hold Control and drag and drop these in the interface controller.h file. We will call it label. For the slider, let's just call it slider. And we will change the connection type to action. For the switch, let's just call it switch. Again, change the connection type to action. Hit connect. Now go into your interface controller.m file. Now you will notice that two new methods have been created over here. The first one for the slider and the second one for the switch. Now we will put some nslog statements in these methods to better understand how these methods work and how we can use them for our Apple Watch projects. So let's begin. nslog value. Now this line will print the value returned by the slider whenever we change the state of the slider in our simulator. Similarly, for the switch, we will put type identifier for an integer because bool values switch between 0 and 1 in integer form. And let's run the code. Now, as I change the state of the slider, you will see the nslog statements appearing over here. 3, 2, 1, and 0. Similarly for the switch, it's off, so 0. It's on, hence the 1. So now we know how the slider and the switch works. So let's write some code for it and see what we can do with it. Now first, we will create a boolean variable to hold the value returned by the switch. So bool, let's call it mute, and we will set the initial value of this variable as true. Similarly, for the slider, we will create a variable int slider value and set it to 0. Now we will go in the slider method and set the value of the label to the value in the slider value variable we just created. So self.label set text NSString string with format volume type identifier for an integer and slider value. But before that, we'll set the value returned by the slider and store it in the slider value variable. And we'll typecast it as int, since the value returned by the slider is in float. Now, we will check inside the switch method if the switch is on or off. So, if mute, then label will display the value of the slider value. So string with format, type identifier, and then slider value. Else self.label set text will display mute. Now we'll run the code. So you see the value in the volume label changes as we change the value in the slider. Now if we turn off the switch, there seems to be some problem. Oh yeah, we haven't changed the value for the mute variable. Let's do that. Mute is equal to value. Run it again. So now, if we click on the switch, it displays mute. Now to make the slider output more values, we can go back to our storyboard, select slider, go to the attributes inspector, and change the maximum value to 100. Similarly for steps, change it to 100 and select continuous. Now if we run the code, you see we can select values between 0 and 100, and if we click on the switch, it goes mute, and if we turn it back on, it gives us the original value of the slider. You can use these concepts to make an app which controls music on your iPhone through network calls called WC sessions, which will be discussed later in this course.